Alrighty, welcome back to this afternoon's session of PyCon AU 2018. Our next speaker is Maia Sauren. Please make her feel welcome.
Green light on, can you hear me? Yes, cool, okay. I work as a software consultant at ThoughtWorks and I've been doing it for many years, and I've worked in a lot of international software teams. Some of them were all over the world, and I was in Melbourne or Brisbane or whatever, and some of the time I lived in India for a year and a half and worked with teams there, or Malaysia, or a few other places. And a lot of that happens because of, hello, welcome to late stage capitalism. Here are some numbers about offshoring work and how that's going and where that's moving to, and it turns out that that's happening a lot these days. You probably know that. Something, Kinsey, Forster, Gartner reports. You can look those up. I tried to find actual numbers about globalized workforces, but they're very hard to find, as you can well imagine. This is what it actually looks like for me, is that I spend a lot of time with very early alarms knitting at airports. So I'm just going to tell you a bunch of stories about what has happened to me while I've been doing this work and what I've learned. And feel free to ask me questions about it at the end. One of the first things that happened is that most of the people on the projects I was working with started using the word guys for everyone, and it drove me mad. And I got really angry about it, and I tried to find ways to make them stop. And my initial question was, is this some linguistic thing? Like, is the word in, I don't know, Hindi or Tamil or whatever for neutral random person male? And it turned out it's not. It turned out that the problem was actually colonization. Who knew? So when the Britishers, as they are called in India, left in 1947, they left 1947 English behind, and things kind of ossified, and a lot of stuff is bizarrely anachronistic with language, with concepts, and everything in all textbooks is male. It hadn't even occurred to anyone I spoke to that my user or the person could be anything other than a man. And when I started having those conversations, people just went, and then they thought about it. And a year and a half later, I stopped like a whole 300-person office using the word guys. And I was thank you. I'm pretty pleased with that. That feels like one of my life achievements, actually. The thing that I learned from it is that I had ideas about what the taxonomy is and what it should be, and I was wrong, and they had ideas, and they were wrong, and we're all wrong. It's okay. Turns out we're all wrong all of the time. The other thing I got out of working with a lot of these teams is that we all do profiling of humans. It's the shortcut way to make stuff work. We all have internalized processes. Oh, people who are like this behave in that way. When people use this language, it means they want that. We all do it. I was wrong. They were wrong too. We all make up these stories about what stuff means, and it doesn't always. And part of the reason is not just cultures, but microcultures. So sure, I identify as a person who works in software. I've also been a research scientist and an engineer, and I speak multiple languages, and I've lived in a lot of countries, some of which I have affinity with, some of which I just lived at. I identify as many things, like queer, like a city dweller, like things I don't even think about, which is like somebody who wears flat shoes. But I do. And when I encounter other people who are people like me, whatever that means, whether they cross 1 or 17 categories, I react to them differently than people who don't. And so I would be on teams where stuff would happen like, sure, the part of the team that's in China isn't surfacing up problems until it's too late. Now, is that because China, or is that because something else? Is it because they've got a historical reason for a manager locally who's created problems for them when they do that? Is it a manager in the US who's made problems for them? What's going on? And we've got all these different microcultures of people who identify with each other. And one of the cool things you can do is create new microcultures when you are in these teams. One of the things that stops cultures growing is secret jokes. I don't know how many of you were here for the last day or so, but there've been a lot of the duck joke. And hands up who even knows what that means? Yeah, a few people. Yeah, okay. A lot of people don't because it doesn't mean anything. The joke is that it doesn't mean anything. The point is, when you're on the phone and there's a bunch of you here in Australia and you all share a language, and there's a bunch of people in Bangalore and there's a bunch of people in Brisbane and there's a bunch of people in a lot of places. In some of my meetings every day, there'd be people in 5 different countries. When you make a joke about the football or Mr. Potato Head and people don't understand what that means, they're left out. And you're leaving them out. The other thing that goes on is that people do cool things with language when they don't really get it. So my team would do these amazing things, like they'd talk about, oh, if we're doing subtraction, addition, and then updation, and I just would want to hug them because they've made up this really gorgeous word. And I kept wanting to encourage those kinds of phrases, and then I would remember that they are adults that have to work with people who are not me, and somebody else is not going to take them seriously if they use words like that. And so I'd have to tell them. And it was like, it kind of broke my heart. But it's a good thing for them and it's a good thing for me to understand that just because I really enjoy the weird, quirky things people do to language, for other people, that's going to be a barrier. And it worked the other way around. I would use phrases and they'd tell me, you know what, you sound really rude when you phrase things like that. And I had no idea it was just really normal phrasing in Australian English. So we talked a lot about what each of us need to do in order to practice to be able to talk to each other. Like we created a Slack channel about language quirks and bizarreness where people would say, why would you phrase things like that? What the hell is wrong with you? It'd start like that. It'd mostly go, what does road under construction mean? I can see the road. What is it under? And I would ask all kinds of other questions about why when you're sitting next to someone and you're talking about them and you use the word she instead of their name, that's considered really rude, and they'd look at me like I came from another planet. Yep. So the question I came to, these are all my photos, by the way, which is why they're not as professional looking as ones from the internet, but is also why they contain a lot of goats. The question is, whose governance model wins both for language and for thinking and for things like what time do we have meetings? It's also things like why should we adhere to what this team wants? Just because 2/3 of the team say speak English as a first language or are in this time zone, why would we do it like that? What's the value of it other than to make me feel comfortable? Other people are uncomfortable. What are the long-term ramifications of making me feel comfortable now or making someone else feel comfortable now? And when we didn't talk it out, things would fall by the wayside and people wouldn't raise problems and they became problems later. And the kinds of questions we got to asking as a team was, if we do things this way, who's going to be uncomfortable? Who is this raising the barriers of entry to? Who's going to participate less because we're doing things like that? And there was everything from naming conventions to like which tool we used. Another thing that was really important to remember is that relationships that exist are easier now, possible to maintain over the phone, over video conference, over text, over IRC, whatever, as long as there's no problems, because changing relationships is really hard to do unless you're face-to-face. And that includes starting a professional relationship. If you've joined a software team and everyone else is somewhere else, you're not really going to have a relationship with them unless you work really hard. Like you've got to make all kinds of conscious efforts about it. I don't know if any of you have been in a long-distance relationship, either personal or professional, but the problems, yeah. Oh, yes. That man bears the scars. Now, the other working principle around all this is that when you are creating change in a relationship, you are creating conflict. It's not necessarily bad, but you don't all agree and you have to resolve that. So, conflict resolution 101, never use the word you, it's all I statements. Never use the word should, it's all we can, how might we. Turns out that's not always true. Turns out if your language or your culture works differently, that's not true. You actually have to have clear statements about expectations. And sometimes that's true for people who grew up in exactly the same microculture as you, which might be this particular school in this particular town during those years. And that's actually a big thing, like what signs your kindergarten had up about how to use your nice voice make a really big difference to what people think is appropriate language. And sometimes it was really big. Sometimes it was, if I don't tell people that this is what I expect of them in clear statements of I expect this at this time, they don't know that. They actually can't translate my doublespeak, my ask culture versus guess culture. Like if I expect people to guess what I want, they're not going to know that, as opposed to when I ask them and they can say yes or no. Now that's another little minefield to navigate. Not everyone feels like they can say no, and creating that is, basically it's culture hacking. Everything you're doing by talking to people who are not like you is culture hacking. They're hacking you, you're hacking them. You're all changing. Conflict comes in a lot of different ways, and what I learned over many years of a lot of pain is that if I don't normalize resolving conflict, what I'm normalizing is unresolved conflict that festers around, right? Who here has had the experience of stuff blowing up in their faces because they've ignored it? Yes, hello, hi, yeah. Yeah, me too. Oh God, I did this last week and it was really terrible. I have a colleague who's got a really different background to me, and she was getting a bit left out of certain important meetings by someone else, and it looked like it was because she'd been on holiday and wasn't around, but actually turned out to be something else completely, turned out to be about communication style, and I didn't have the conversation with her early enough, so she got really angry at me because I was leaving her out. And she was right. I was going along with what person higher on the hierarchy wanted without actually having the face-to-face with her. And because I did that, and I know better. I know better, I do this all the time, and it was really annoying. Thankfully, we sat down the next day and sorted it out, and things are okay. But it took to the point where we were really both very annoyed with each other about stuff for us to sort it out, which is a problem. So my advice to you is don't do that. Have the awkward conversation as early as you can. Be awkward now and save yourself more awkward later. Basically. It's kind of hard, but like the whole point of adulting, I've learned, is paying off tech debt early. And when you're creating change, you're creating debt. And the question is, are you creating debt or are you creating investment? And all debt comes with interest. You might not know about it for a while, but it's there. So the best thing I found I could do is be a micro-adult rather than wait and have like a big conversation and save it for like the retro or save it for the, the special meeting. is I have to have uncomfortable conversations, little ones, every single day, or as often as this stuff crops up, or as often as I see it. Because saving it for later, no matter how, none of it is small. There's no such thing as small stuff. And when you normalize small stuff being dealt with, it makes it a lot easier for big stuff to be dealt with when it comes up, because you've already got all the infrastructure for having those conversations. So remember what I was saying about conversations being really hard and relationships being hard to change face to face. So we tried, we tried things like send somebody from China over, or one of us will go over every 3 months, and sometimes your project can afford that and sometimes it can't. And sometimes you have a lot of Skype meetings or Zoom or whatever mediocre video conferencing technology you're using. They're all mediocre, let's be real. They're solving some are downright awful. I'm pretty sure they're solving a different problem to the ones I have. But not making that anyone's fault and doing what you can. And Kelsey, I think, gave a talk earlier today where she was talking about just that kind of thing. Go watch her video about it if you didn't go and see it, because it's hard. People are hard, yo, who knew? Here's another thing I learned. If you don't like rubbishy meetings where everything goes on forever, you have to have a lot more quiet pre-meeting meetings. And you don't have to call them meetings. They're hey, do you know about the thing? Can I tell you what I'm planning to say? Or just saying hello to someone every single day means that they know who you are and they're okay with you raising new stuff. And people knowing what your face looks like when you're annoyed versus what your face looks like when you're thinking and look constipated, that's important. They need to know that before you're in a meeting together solving stuff that you don't know how to solve. I've actually ended up, my job is basically working in software teams, and I've played every single role except developer, and I kind of ended up by accident in this job, this type of job, because I went to a lot of really bad meetings. And I decided that I didn't have the patience for that, so I was just going to learn how to make them better. And now I'm ruthless. Like, my meetings are good. One of the ways that I found to have more meetings, non-meeting meetings, is to have sticker time every day. It's actually one of the very best team building exercises I know of, is that I make sure I go up to everyone on my team, and I don't care whether they're the GM or whether they're the UXer that I speak to once a fortnight, and I go, what have you done this week that you're proud of? And if you can tell me, you get a sticker, and you can always tell me. There is always something you've done that you can be proud of. Which means that I have an excuse to talk to somebody every single week. And I know who they are, and I know the kinds of things that they think about themselves and about what an achievement is and where they fit in and what they think is worth understanding. And a lot of the time when I would first start on working on an international team, and I'd ask people this, especially if we haven't met, like if this was a phone relationship, they'd freak the hell out. And they'd call me out and basically like go, why are you doing this? Is this part of my KPIs? And I'd have to say, no, that's fine. And I would end up making a sticker chart so that I knew I spoke to everyone, and then sending the photo around, and it took a lot of time, but it meant that when we had problems, they got resolved really quickly. Model good behavior turns out to be a good thing. The standard you walk past, the standard you set by doing the right thing, or the thing that you want to see happen, means that other people tend to fall in line with it unless they have a real problem with it. And when people break standards, it's really important to call it out early and call it out publicly. It doesn't have to be big. It can just be, let's talk about this later. It can be, hey, let's you and I talk about this later, said in a public meeting. It's important to be kind about it, but you've got to make sure that if someone, well, what I found works is that if somebody's broken the spoken or unspoken rules of how the group works and it doesn't get acknowledged publicly, things fester and there's conversations on the quiet. Well, there'll always be conversations on the quiet, but at least there'll be an obvious intervention where the standard gets upheld. This is an actual conversation that I have with people when I start relationships with them, which is, when we disagree, how do you want to do it? Do you want me to call you? Do you want me to send you an email and let you think about it? Do you want to shout at me about why you're upset and I'll just assume that you're venting and then we'll get to figuring things out? What do you want to do? And a lot of people don't know how to handle that question because they've never thought about the fact that they have choices in how you do that. Which was a really nice standard to set the standard of you get to choose what our microculture is. Oh, I'm going to tell you a story about working on a project where we were creating an app for an Ebola treatment centre in Kerrytown in Sierra Leone. So this was this bizarre situation. I haven't got any trigger warning-worthy pictures or anything particularly. And I'm not going to go into detail about what Ebola is. Most of you know what it is. Most of us have seen the the hyperbole and a half, you know, the Ebola pain scale. If you haven't, you should look at it. It's really cool. And for the first week that I was on the project, that's all I could think about. And then I started thinking about, you know, this is a real thing. Ebola is really horrific. It's a hemorrhagic fever, and with everything that goes with that. And if you go look up or think about the definitions of those words, they're really awful. So during the biggest Ebola epidemic that happened in West Africa in 2015-16, ended up working on a project to create an app. Now, what's going on is that you've got a highly infectious zone with people with Ebola are, and then you've got the rest of the treatment centre. Now, to get into the where the sick people are, you basically cover yourself in a spacesuit, and you take stuff in that you can chlorinate, or you take stuff that stays there, or stuff that you destroy when it comes out, because everything is virulent. Everything is highly infectious. So if you are, say, a clinician and you're doing rounds at the hospital, or if you need to go look after a patient, you have to spend some time getting into this personal protective equipment, which includes everything covered up, including 3 layers of gloves, and you've got to write down what you've done and how you've treated people, and you've got to make that information available. So we created an app that could work in the red zone on tablets that stayed there. And we had an international team that worked at all kinds of hours. My stand-up was at midnight, my local time. If you can avoid doing that to yourself, do it. And we just pulled in people as they were available, and what I learned is that the tools don't matter. We changed video conferencing software 3 times because people couldn't use it, and then the guy in China joined and it didn't work through his firewall. We had all these different prototyping tools, and you just go with it. There's no time. This is what it looked like eventually, and it was really quite successful. Stand up at midnight means that I was sometimes awake 8 p.m. till 5 a.m. for 2 months in a row, and I made idiotic decisions like creating a slide that was the wrong way round, and we lost time. It's hard. What I found that I needed to do was use other people's unconscious bias to make sure that we could all work together. Creating all these good relationships with people meant that they were okay with my suggestions even if they didn't like them. And I was okay with theirs even if I didn't like them. The other thing that I ended up doing was stepping away for a while. Like, after setting all these cultural norms, I would sometimes, most of the time by accident, go and leave for a reasonable period of time, and I'd come back and found that everyone's a BA and the culture's still working and people are doing things, and it was great. The other thing that I found was really true is that it doesn't matter what your strategy is in terms of doing anything, your culture is what's going to determine how stuff gets sorted. And if you haven't sorted out your culture, and if you're not attacking this as a cultural problem, you're going to get swamped. I got swamped. I got swamped a bunch of times. That's pretty much it. I think the adulting slide was actually the main thing I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maia. We have time for a few questions, if anyone has questions. Yes.
Hi. Excellent talk, thank you. I work in a globally distributed team where there's people I don't ever talk to in London because the time zones don't overlap. There's people in America I talk to in the morning, and there's people in the afternoon in India that I talk to, but the people in America and the people in India never talk to each other because their time zones don't overlap. And I find that the culture changes over the course of the day because I'm interacting with different people with different expectations, and I sort of worry that we're not getting a good global culture. Do you have any tips for working with teams that are distributed around time zones in that way?
I mean, the short answer is you're not getting good global culture, as you have correctly identified. My tip would be to get those two groups to talk to each other, even if it's just through me, to have at least one meeting once a week where we're all there and people can hear each other's voices, have little videos of each other, find some kind of excuse for here is a video of us talking, whether it's some rubbishy, promoty, internal work thing or something else, so that people at least recognize each other's cadence of speaking and who they are, and just the mental shift from the dev team in India who we have offshored to an actual person I have seen, and this is what the QA looks like, makes all the difference.
That all sounds like very hard-won knowledge. Is any of that in any sort of official textbook management university course anywhere to your knowledge?
Probably. I'll put my slides up online.
They are now the textbook.
There'll be a video even.
Did you have a question, sir?
Hey, just how do you deal with contractors who come in for, say, a particular project, but you can't really deal with their arrogance, and how do you bring them to try to have the same culture across those contractors for that time? Or is that something where you kind of find it a bit hard to do it, and that's where either A, they last, or B, you have to get them to leave? Or, yeah.
Yeah, sadly, I'm often part of the team that comes in with that arrogance as the contractors. Just enforce the rules. Again, do it early, do it often, do it kindly. Do it as kindly as you can. And even having conversations on the quiet with people of that kind of working style is not culturally appropriate here.
Hi, thank you. That was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. And I'm about to be critical of you. Hopefully, is that okay?
Please,
and
please.
Are we allowed to be in conflict in that way? I noticed that a lot of the techniques you use are sort of personality-driven to a certain extent. But my question is this sort of frameworkatized in your organisation? So does everybody at your level use these kind of techniques? Is it pervasive in the culture to do this kind of thing?
Not everyone. I'd say I'm not divergent from the general culture of where I am, but being a consultant, I've worked in a lot of different cultures and a lot of different offices. I think I've worked on about 13 or 14 different project teams that involve people from outside my company. A lot of this works because I do it, and a lot of this works because they're good techniques no matter who does it. And a lot of the time when the cultures are really divergent organizationally, what I found is I have to build a microculture person by person. And that's not a scalable model. It's hard. but after a while, other people start doing it. So, you know, spread the meme.
Please thank Maia. Alrighty, we have a